So you just purchased the Sony ZV-E1 and you're wondering which lens should I get to start producing some incredible looking videos? Well, today I've got 5 lenses for you that will still keep your setup compact while allowing you to take advantage of that A7S III sensor that's in the Sony ZV-E1 so you can capture some great looking footage. Okay, let's start off with an ultra wide angle lens, and this is actually the only lens on this list that's not a Sony native lens. This is the Viltrox 16mm f1.8. Priced at $549, this lens is absolutely perfect if you're planning on doing a lot of self-filming like vlogging. On top of that, if you're filming a lot of your talking head shots in a smaller room, this lens is going to make that room appear so much larger. Which is also the reason why this lens is great for things like landscape or real estate, because you're able to show so much in your frame. And not to mention, a wide focal length, especially a compact lens like this one, makes it a great option to use when you're flying your camera on a gimbal. The lens itself produces great looking results. It also comes with some unique features like the helpful display on the top of the lens for shooting static manual focus scenes. A Sony native alternative for this lens would be the Sony 14mm f1.4 G Master. And don't get me wrong, it's a phenomenal lens offering great optical quality, and it's also just as compact. However, it's going to cost you 3 times as much, coming in at $1,498. Now we've got one of my favorite lenses, and yes, it's gonna sound like I'm pretty heavily biased on this, but can you blame me? I waited 2 years for this lens to finally come out. Of course, we're talking about the Sony 24mm f1.4 G Master. That's gonna run you about $1,298. Why is this my favorite lens? That's because 24mm is probably my favorite focal length. It's wide enough to capture landscapes, but it's also tight enough to still make people look good. That means regardless of the shooting situation, this lens can just live on my camera, and when I need to and I pull my camera out, it's always gonna look good no matter what I'm shooting, whether it's people or it's landscapes. It is by far my favorite lens of all time, and it's always in my camera bag, regardless if I'm going to a client shoot or I'm going on a trip. This is the one lens I will always recommend to everybody. This lens produces incredibly sharp images with great optical quality, resulting in low amounts of artifacts like chromatic aberration or distortion. On top of that, its optical treatment also means that it handles lens flares really well and consistently remains contrasty even in backlit lighting situations. The f1.4 aperture means not only are you able to get this extremely blurry background effect and create that subject separation, but it also means that you're able to let more light into your camera, making it a great lens for low light situations. This lens is also pretty lightweight and compact, making it naturally a perfect pairing with the Sony ZV-E1. Also, you're going to notice that starting with this lens, all of the lens recommendations on this list are Sony native lenses. And that's because in my experience lately, in-body image stabilization like active stabilization or the new dynamic active stabilization in the Sony ZV-E1 works much better with native Sony glass than it does with third-party glass. So since I'm making lens recommendations for the Sony ZV-E1, if you're planning on doing handheld shooting a lot and you're going to be using stabilization a lot, then this is something you might want to consider. Next, we've got the one zoom lens on today's list of recommendations, the Sony 16-35 f4G. It's priced at $1,199, and this lens is super compact and is the full frame equivalent to the extremely popular vlogging lens on APS-C, the 10-18 f4. Thanks to its 16mm wide focal length on the wide end, it's basically able to do the same thing as the Viltrox 16mm that I mentioned at the top of this video. It's great for vlogging, it's great for flying on a gimbal, it's great for landscape, it's great for real estate. But thanks to the fact that it's a zoom lens, it's also very versatile and able to zoom into 35mm. And now, thanks to the zoom, the 35mm focal length is a lot more flattering on people and faces. And what's really nice about this is now you only have to bring one super compact lens with you. The optical quality of this lens is top-notch, similar to the other Sony lenses we're talking about today. It produces sharp results with little to no chromatic aberrations or distortions. It's extremely compact, meaning that your Sony ZV-E1 will properly feel like a small camera that you can bring with you anywhere. Now, the one concern that you might have that I already know you're thinking about is the fact that this lens is an f4 lens. But that's why I think it pairs so well with the Sony ZV-E1. Thanks to the fact that the Sony ZV-E1 has the same sensor as the A7S III, it performs superbly in low light. And specifically, I'm talking about bumping the ISO up to 12,800. So unless you're in a situation where there's literally no light, in low light situations like right now, we're past sunset, I'm still able to get a clean looking image despite the fact that I'm at f4. Now there is a new updated version of the 16-35mm f2.8 G Master Mark II that just came out. And that will give you that more light that an f2.8 lens will offer, and it'll give you more background blur and subject separation. But it is going to be heavier, less compact, and it's going to cost you $2,298, which for me, since I'm only using this lens for vlogging and for a lot less of the work that I do, I think that the 16-35 f4 does exactly what it needs to do without making me spend an extra $1,000. Then we got another one of my favorite lenses that I use all the time, and that's the Sony 50mm f1.4 G Master, which is priced at $1,298. Everyone knows that a 50mm focal length is perfect for achieving that cinematic look. Now take that 50mm focal length, add an f1.4 aperture, and now you can create a cinematic, blurry background look no matter where you're at, whenever you want. On top of that, this lens is just about as lightweight and compact as the 24mm f1.4 G Master. 50mm is a focal length that's really just perfect for filming people, whether it's for an interview or a narrative piece like a short film. It's a great focal length for capturing your subject while maintaining a balance between subject separation and giving context to where your subject is. Aside from the 24mm f1.4, this is actually the lens I use the most, especially for things like weddings and interviews. Like every other G Master lens I've reviewed in the past, the 50mm f1.4 provides incredible optical performance with great color rendition, and like every other G Master lens I've talked about, I love the fact that it has all the physical controls readily accessible right on the lens, like a declickable aperture ring and custom function buttons. There is an f1.2 version of this lens, which comes in at $1,898. And if you have the extra cash, I think it's an even better version of this lens. Though I will say that for the purposes of video, I rarely find the need for using f1.2. The razor thin depth of field becomes a bit too much, and the additional light you can let in for low light scenarios can be helpful. But like I said, the low light performance of the Sony ZV-E1 is absolutely incredible, and you can make do without the f1.2 aperture and save yourself $600 in the process. And finally, we've got the Sony 90mm f2.8 G macro lens that costs $1,098. Before we even get into the macro capabilities, I think that's something that most people don't realize, is that this lens is actually a great portrait lens. Similar to the Sony 50mm we just talked about, 90mm is a great focal length to create that intense subject separation. Even though it's just an f2.8 lens, as you can see, at 90mm plus f2.8, you really get that extremely blurry background effect, which really helps you bring the viewer's focus onto the subject on screen. But of course, it's also one of the best autofocus capable macro lenses available on the Sony E-mount system. This is the lens I use to shoot all of my macro footage for my product reviews on this channel, and I even bust it out during client work like weddings so I can photograph the still life stuff like your wedding invite cards, the bouquets, or the rings. Like the other lenses on this list, it has incredible optical performance. It's sharp, and more importantly, for a macro lens, it handles chromatic aberration like it's no one's business. The reason why this is important is because often in product shots, there are some very high contrast scenes like white number markings on a black lens. If you were to use a lens with poor chromatic aberration control, you'd end up with distracting, unwanted fringing that takes away from the professional look you're trying to capture. The physical controls on this lens also make it really pleasant to work with, especially the manual focus control to really dial in your focus for your product shots, and the fact that it has optical steady shot, which you can pair with in-body image stabilization in the Sony ZV-E1 to get much smoother handheld shots. Those are the top 5 lenses I'd recommend to you if you're looking for the perfect lens to go with your new Sony ZV-E1. Now, that doesn't mean those are the only lenses I would recommend to you. There are a ton of great Sony glass for the Sony E-mount system. For example, the 24-70 and 70-200 classics. But those are bigger and heavier and kind of go against the spirit of the lightweight video beast that the Sony ZV-E1 is meant to be. If you're interested in checking out any of the lenses I talked about today, links will be in the description down below. All right, that's it for this one. If you found it helpful, make sure to leave a like and let us know in the comment section down below what your favorite lens is. Oh, and I just started a Discord server for creatives. Whether you're a photographer, videographer, or content creator, it's a space to chat with fellow creatives and network, get inspired, and ask any camera-related questions. For example, if you have any questions about the Sony ZV-E1, that'd be a great place to ask. If you're interested in joining, shoot me a DM on Instagram and I'll send you the invite link. All right, next time I see you, it's gonna be from IBC 2023 in Amsterdam. Peace.